presentation.
Thanks so much, Tony. And I know Herman said it's a little bit of a depressing picture, but I hope that what I'm going to present is maybe a picture filled with opportunity for us and possibilities, because diversity and inclusion is one of the hot topics of the moment. And as Tony mentioned, we're really delighted today to be able to launch the Diversity and Inclusion Awards. So if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide, you might remember back in 2019, we launched the first iteration of the Diversity and Inclusion Awards, and we focused on three categories. They were the inspirational role model, the high flyer, and the diversity and inclusion team. And we found ourselves three very, very worthy winners of those awards. So you may remember the inspirational role model went to Christina Ramirez, who is now the CEO of TAP. Well, what we're looking for in that role, in that award, is somebody that has a really significant impact on their business. We can see very, very clear business delivery. It's a strong female leader, but it's also someone who has diversity and inclusion close to their heart, and they're trying to support that agenda within the organization that they're working in. Now, it may be somebody not in one of our airlines, it might be somebody in the wider industry, but we're really looking for some inspirational role models. And that's one of the reasons these awards are so important to us. There's a phrase that we use a lot in diversity and inclusion: you can't be what you can't see. And so these awards shine a light on some of the great people that we've got around the world driving better outcomes for diversity and inclusion across the industry. The second award that we'll be looking for nominations for is the High Flyer. And again, in 2019, that went to Fatimatu Nuchemo, who is responsible for launching the Young African Aviation Professionals Association. And you may remember from the AGM when she received her award, she's a dynamic force for change across the industry. She would single-handedly encourage everybody to join aviation if she could, and that's what she's been doing with her charity. And in fact, these awards are generously sponsored by Qatar Airways, and they give $25,000 for each award recipient. And both Christina and Fatimatu use that money for charitable work to improve diversity and inclusion. The final award that we give, and this really is only for IATA members, is for the diversity and inclusion team. And we're looking really for teams who are driving real change across the spectrum of diversity and inclusion. It doesn't have to be just on gender, but really, what are they doing around all aspects? So they might be doing something around their nationalisation programs. They may be looking at what they're doing on Pride. So we've just come out of Pride Month, which many of our airlines have celebrated. Then we might be looking at what they've done to make their organisation more inclusive. The application's open today, so this is we can declare this the official announcement that we are opening the awards. They open today, and they are open until July the 29th. We try and make these awards as easy as possible. So all people have to do if they want to be considered for an award is submit a very short video, and that can be about 3 minutes in length, no more than that. We actually say if it's longer than 3 minutes, we won't consider it. And that's complemented with a little bit of narrative to describe why this person should be nominated. The first two awards are really nomination only, so you can't really nominate yourself for those first two awards. But obviously, the third award, the Diversity and Inclusion Team, we fully expect some of our member airlines to nominate the great work that they are doing. We then have a really prestigious group of judges. In fact, 2019's winners. There's no better people to judge the quality of the awards than the previous winners. And they will be chaired by Karen Walker, who will help us decide on who are the worthy recipients of these awards. In 2019, when we first launched them, we were overwhelmed by the quality of those nominations, but I fully expect, even though it has been quite a difficult 18 months for us, I fully anticipate that we will get many more nominations for these awards, and we'll be really looking forward to announcing them at the AGM and the World Air Transport Summit in Boston between the 3rd and the 5th of October. really looking forward to receiving those nominations. It's always a great way of finding out what's going on with regard to diversity and inclusion across the world. And of course, every airline has a slightly different focus on what they're doing, but it's obviously a great opportunity for us to celebrate in an 18 months that hasn't been full of good news and has, as Hammond quite rightly said, is a little bit of a depressing picture in many places. This is a cause for celebration and recognising some great work ahead. So in 2019, when Christopher Luxon received his award for Air New Zealand, if any of you were there at that AGM, you might remember he said, we can't be here in 5 years' time talking about the same thing. We have to do something. And so those awards actually gave birth to what we now call the 25 by 2025 initiative. And that's our diversity and inclusion initiative. We listened to what he said and said, he's right. We can all set our intent and say, yeah, we need to be better. We need more female CEOs. I mean, everybody remembers the IATA picture where there's the CEOs and there's one or two women. I think there's been a couple of great announcements of female CEOs recently, but it's still very, very limited. I think it's about 4% of our airline members that have female CEOs. So we want to do more. And whilst philosophically quotas can be quite divisive, we said, well, what about if we set some aspirational targets for the industry to work towards? And so 25 by 2025, you may remember when we launched it back in September 2019, we said is around fixing some key metrics across the industry by 25% or up to a minimum of 25%. So we have a number of airlines that are already at 25% for some of their senior leadership roles, but they made a commitment and said, you know what, we might be at 32%, but we're still going to improve that by 25% by the time we get to 2025. On the other hand, we have some airlines who may be at 11% for their senior leaders, and they said, well, actually, we're going to get to 25%. We're going to be entirely focused on getting the right quality talent, diverse talent into our leadership roles, and we're going to actually aspire to 25%. When the airlines sign up for this, they actually can decide what they want their targets to be across a number of different things. So we insist on the number of women in their senior leadership positions. Now, in very small airlines, that might be a very, very small group of people. In larger airlines, they may actually be measuring already not just their board level, but the next level down, so perhaps their directors. And we ask them to describe that so that we can start to measure what the change is for those organisations. It's not only the airlines that we're asking to do this, we are also looking at ourselves. And there's a couple of key areas, I'm sure that for those of you that are attending these events on a regular basis, you know that we don't always have very representative panels. So it may well be that you sit and you see a panel of 4 men talking about an issue that you've heard about before. Well, we're saying, even internally, when we do our events, we need to have much better gender representation. Now, that's not always easy. And one of the things that our signatories, we've been talking to our signatories about is how do we access some great female speakers to make sure that they've got visibility, that they can engage in this. In these initiatives. And of course, that is the power of the collective. We always say in our meetings that this is about collaboration, not competition when it comes to talent for the industry. And the one thing that our members are saying is that they're really appreciating this forum to share best practices and ideas, because every airline has a slightly nuanced, it's slightly different from other industries, of course. And the one thing that often doesn't happen is they don't often get the opportunity to talk with other airlines because they may be the only airline in the country in which they're operating, or there may be a small number of airlines. So we're really creating this forum to share best practices that are really implementable within the industry and that are relevant for the industry. And so that's why, we launched 25 by 2025 back in 2019. Now, we could have had no idea of the economic consequences of on people within aviation. And if we look at the most recent data that was issued by our economics team, we believe that employment within the airlines reduced by nearly 930,000 jobs. Now, the numbers here are not necessarily super clear because some people are on furlough, and we don't even know at this point in time what that gender impact has been. We don't know if it has been more adversely impacting the women. That's a piece of data that we are looking at as we start to look at our own metrics. But this, for me, feels like an opportunity. So if you look at what the World Economic Forum is saying, they're saying that the pandemic actually impacted the gender gap by a generation. So that means it's going to take another generation longer before we start to get towards equality, before we start to get towards better representation, before we start to get towards better education. And we know that for many people, if they want to come into the airlines, they obviously have to start with a fairly robust education. And we need to make sure that there's good exposure to that. We know that women have been more adversely impacted by the pandemic overall. But, we were talking, I heard earlier, we're talking about, we think business class travel isn't coming back, but leisure travel is. And women often make leisure travel decisions, which is why we want more diversity. It's not about just doing the right thing. Diversity actually translates into better business performance. There's a lot of research from McKinsey on the impact of having more diverse teams in your senior leadership team into much better business performance. But it kind of makes sense because then you have innovation in the products that you're developing as well. So that's why we kind of see this as an opportunity. Whilst the pandemic has been obviously devastating, from a diversity, equity and inclusion point of view, we see this as an opportunity. So you may hear me say, equity, that's a new word for us. We originally said diversity and inclusion. Why is equity being added in there? And what we are sensing when we talk to all of our member airlines, and we've got 62 that have signed up to be part of this initiative so far, 62 so far, is that actually a couple of things are combining. They see that they've got to have more diversity in their teams, in the way that they develop products. But actually legislation is coming along as well. So actually governments are starting to switch on to the fact that we can't get away with systemic biases in the way that we pay people, in the way that we recruit people. So there is a lot of legislation coming along that starts to address some of the equity issues, not just in aviation, but actually systemically. And so governments are starting to implement policy. We've been having some interesting conversations with Iowa about a piece of work that they're doing to influence in the US on policy decisions to support better diversity and inclusion. So one of the key things that we're hearing from all of our signatories is that actually they're going to put diversity, equity and inclusion at the heart of the restart. They're not just leaving it as a kind of a side project, but it's something they really want to build in to what they're doing. And I think that is totally indicated by the fact that during the pandemic, we actually had people signing up for the initiative. Now, that feels a little bit counterintuitive. On the one hand, there's a lot of HR issues to downsize organizations. Why do you want to sign up and make this a priority? But it's a priority because it's about pays into the sustainability agenda. The next generation that are entering the workforce are far more particular about the organizations that they want to join. It's a really important agenda item for the new generations. And of course, we want to be attractive to the new generations. So I think in some ways it's whilst it might be counterintuitive that people are signing up for this initiative at the time that they are often downsizing, I think it actually signals this opportunity that we've got as an industry to step away from the kind of pale, stale and male view that some people have of the industry. It's something that we've got to shift and making it critical is a critical element. So those 62 signatories, they represent 32% of passenger and cargo traffic around the world. You'll see we've got some really, really big names on there. We're hoping to get more. And, when we were talking with Tony about this event, that's one of the things that we're looking for. There's some really big names in there. There's some more that we'd love. And those of you that are looking at the slide, you'll see that we've got a couple of non-airline members as well. So we had Donata, Avia Partner and Rolls-Royce. And they came to us and said, we love the initiative. How can we be involved? We know that we're not an airline, but we want to get this collective wisdom of being part of this. And we also want to set some targets for our organisation to move forward. We also are collaborating with Women in Aviation and Aerospace Charter in the UK. We're collaborating with the likes of IATA. Of course, the power of that is, as I said before, collaboration, not competition, is going to help us turn the dial on getting more diversity into the industry. What that looks like from a practical sense over the next 5 years, we've got a number of different activities that we're working on. When we launched, we said, let's baseline the key metrics. So you can't say you've achieved anything if you don't baseline the data. So we said, let's baseline the data on these key metrics. Now, we should have done our first baselining around April, May 2020. It was entirely inappropriate for us to do that at that point in time. We didn't feel that would land well with the airlines. The airlines were struggling. So we said, let's defer it. Let's do our first baseline of data in 2021. We're currently doing that. The data is currently coming in, and the airlines themselves have set their targets, and we're starting to get a view of, what does the picture look like? We'll be releasing that data around the AGM, because we will be aggregating it all up, so we get a much more coherent view of some of the challenges that we've got across the organisation. I mentioned before that a lot of the airlines are saying the benefit for them is actually coming together and looking at best practices that are relevant for the industry, because there's you can go on, I'm sure you go on LinkedIn or whichever social media platform you use, you can join any amount of training on diversity, equity and inclusion. I think I get invited to a session every single day to talk about it or to, participate in it. But they're not airline focused. And so in 2022, we're going to be aggregating a lot of the best practices from the airlines to look at creating a best practice playbook that will be useful and where we can share ideas around, common challenges that we have. And then in 2023, what we'll be looking at is updating some studies that are already have been done. So in 2019, we partnered with a number of players and Korn Ferry to release the Soaring Through the Glass Ceiling survey. That will be 4 years old. It's an appropriate juncture to take a look and to actually review where we are and look at kind of the state of the industry and how much progress we've made and what more we will still have to do. Because although we say 25 by 2025, it doesn't stop at 2025. Obviously, there will be more to do. There'll be new issues, there'll be some evolution, there'll be new policies in place, and we want to make sure that we continue to be attractive to the best talent in the world, and that talent is a diverse talent. Tony, thank you. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Great, thanks very much, Jane. So while we're waiting for questions in the queue, maybe I'll ask a couple myself.
Please do.
So, and before then, actually the first one is just to clarify the date for when people need to get their applications in for the awards.
Yeah.
I think you said it was the 29th of July, but that seems a little bit short.
Oh, no, sorry, the 29th of August. It opens on the 8th of July, and it's the 29th of August.
Excellent. Good. And where can people find out more information as to where they can apply?
On IATA.org.
Super.
We have a dedicated page that we'll be launching on there and sharing the details of how they apply. And they can just take this video and we have a mechanism where they can upload their video and their application.
Excellent. Also, I guess a question would be, so you said even in the crisis, the 25 by 2025, you've seen more people joining. What trends have you seen in what those companies are doing on this issue? Has anything changed in the crisis? Has the emphasis or focus shifted a bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, the first thing was obviously the crisis, and for many of them, they were having to let people go. But what is quite interesting is there was a real focus on not changing the dynamic or the ecosystem of the diversity that they already had, because in many companies, it was quite fragile. Their diversity picture was quite fragile. And that's, I think, why they were encouraged to start and join us in 25 by 2025, because they didn't want to sacrifice the progress that had been made prior to the pandemic on diversity and inclusion. I think the other shift that I've really noticed is there seems to be far more senior level support for this than perhaps we had seen maybe 6 or 7 years ago. You know, diversity and inclusion felt like it was a nice to have. And I think with the combination of people focusing on sustainability and the environment, that a lot of the senior leaders that lead on these programs are starting to say they see it as a business critical item that supports their overall corporate social responsibility agendas.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few questions in the queue. So first one is saying, if it's correct that there are only 4% of airline CEOs as women, does the industry need to do something much more drastic? And the questioner talks about, for example, events and conferences where mostly men still dominate the podium. And they make the comment that this often results in very predictable dialogue rather than pushing the CEOs into new inspiring ideas and discussions. Any sort of thoughts there on how the 25 by 2025 commitment might potentially evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think this sharing of best practice includes sharing of best people that can be available for those industry events. And that's one of the things that we're looking at is how do we create a forum where we know who to go to, because sometimes those senior level women just aren't visible enough to us externally, and so we're not able to kind of reach out to them. So I think that we've got a lot to do in kind of uncovering who those hidden gems are that can be also a little bit provocative and a little bit challenging the dialogue on a lot of these things. That's what I would like to see us doing in our events, certainly in the events that we're doing with IATA. I think the first part of the question is, what can you do that is more radical? Well, one of the things that some organizations are doing, some of the airlines that are doing, is they're starting to tie diversity targets to executive objectives and executive pay. And if there's one way to change behaviors, it's incentivizing it in a way that that gets people to pay attention. Now, again, it's not, there's no one perfect solution, but these are obviously options that different organizations are looking at to make sure that diversity and inclusion is embedded into the way in which they work, and it's not just a nice to have.
Okay, thank you. We have a question that asks, so we've got a lot of airlines on the signed up to the charter, but the question is, what about the rest? And,
yeah.
It still hasn't reached the tipping point of representing the majority. So what's the plan for that, and how does this program get bigger and more inclusive?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons that we're here today talking about it, is because, the more we need your help a little bit to kind of reach out and encourage other airlines to go. We are having a significant number of conversations with other airlines. I would love to think that we will get to 75, 80 in the next couple of months. I suspect, this is what we're hoping for, is when we present this at the AGM and the CEOs of the airlines that haven't signed up realize that this is an initiative that is getting more and more momentum, of course, I hope that will put some kind of collective pressure on people to say, maybe this is something that I need to pay attention to. Now, the really important thing here, Tony, is that this initiative is not designed to be something that's painful to the airlines and different to what they are already doing. It's supposed to sit alongside it and create this collective community to drive it. So many organizations have got initiatives in place. These are not about contradicting their initiatives, but it's providing a collective focus so that everybody can be part of saying, we did it. Because imagine in 2025, I have a very strong vision for Willie. I don't know if he shares this vision, but if we're saying now that we've lost 930,000 jobs from the industry, we should, for those airline members that have signed up, say, and this is how many more women we brought into the industry during the recovery phase. Now, I think that's going to be quite a powerful shift, because if we use the metrics that they're signing up for, there will be a significant number of women that we are going to be proactively bringing into the industry.
Okay. We have a slightly different take on this. An interesting question about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
And that evolved since the 25 by 2025 commitment started. But the question is, has that changed or in any way altered the way that you see the airlines viewing diversity and inclusion? And I guess the second aspect of that would be, given that was originated in the US, have you seen any impact go beyond the US? Is it global, or are different parts of the world working or acting in different ways?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. We were just having a conversation exactly about this. So we've positioned 25 by 2025 about gender diversity. But actually, the signatories, we're not talking just about gender diversity. We are talking about the impact of Black Lives Matter. I mentioned we've just come out of Pride Month. A lot of airlines are focusing on Pride. But for some airlines, Pride cannot be a priority because in their countries, it's still illegal to be a lesbian or gay. So, that's a challenge for some of those airlines to make sure their diversity agenda is truly inclusive. And that's, again, why I think we start to see more interest is because we have to represent the people that we fly around the world. And, from an IATA point of view, we've got to make sure that we're kind of looking at the whole gamut of diversity and inclusion. We obviously, it includes lots of different aspects. I think that big topic of conversation is around transgender. So travel still requires, in most places, a gender declaration. But people are starting to not identify with those genders. So how do we make sure that actually, it's not even within the organisation, but as a traveller, how do we make sure that it feels inclusive and that you don't feel discriminated against because you don't identify with the traditional binary genders of male or female? So, again, that's why having these conversations is so important. And having them as a collective, I think, is really important because, we want to make sure that we can understand the issues in different regions, in different geographies, in different organisations.
Great, thank you. And I guess the last question would be just thinking about the awards. What types of activities perhaps are you anticipating people to be promoting or talking about in their nominations? Can you give us sort of some characteristics of the types of things that we're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little reticent to do that because then it forces people down one particular area and says, well, I don't look like that, and therefore, I don't know that I would be eligible. I mean, I think back to the nominations that we had in 2019. I mean, Christina was a very obvious candidate. She was driving a clear business agenda, driving value to the business, but also was supporting a lot of the diversity and inclusion initiatives. Flybe was one of the big advocates for the creation of women in aviation and aerospace. Charlotte was one of the first supporters. So she was doing a lot, kind of not of driving business results as a strong female leader, but also, looking at diversity and inclusion. Anna Matu is a completely different, she's a different story. She is, as I said earlier, she's a force for good in actually inspiring people into aviation. So we had a number of nominations last time about people that are doing charity work to inspire more girls into aviation, to change this dynamic that we have, this mental model that we have of men are in the flight deck and women are in the cabin, which still holds true for very many young girls. And there was a piece of work done just before the crisis where it was with, I think it was Pricewaterhouse that did the work. They asked kids between the age of 6 and 11 to draw pictures of people in industry, and of course one of those jobs was a captain, and they more or less all drew men. So there's a very deep-seated perception around who sits in these areas. So some of our nominees last time were people that were trying to change that dynamic. Equally, there were young leaders within an organisation that were really challenging the stereotype. I remember we had somebody from United that was driving a massive change agenda on on IT, and she was very openly supporting the LGBTQ initiatives within the organisation. Stepped up and driven a change in that. And then, of course, the team of the year could be many different things. I had to say last time it was very, very close between a number of different airlines, and Air New Zealand picked it because they were doing a lot of really good work on not just the traditional measures of diversity, but actually looking at their local populations, so Indigenous populations, and encouraging them into the workplace. So, I'm a bit reticent to say it's one thing, because it could be very many things. But if you're working with someone that you think, you know what, she inspires me around diversity, she shows me what a good leader can be, and because of the great work that she's doing, then definitely think about nominating for the awards.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jane. I think the message there is it's really open and in the spirit of the awards, as inclusive as it could possibly be. I suspect that the judges will have a very difficult challenge. And I suppose in terms of nominations, it's also perfectly fine for journalists, if you've seen an inspiring story, to also send in a nomination. Is that correct?
Totally. I mean, I think, in some ways, all of you on the call are perfectly placed to identify who you think could be an inspirational role model or a high flyer, because you see a lot of those people out there in the media. You actually are really critical in sharing those stories and helping change the face of aviation.
Okay. We've had a couple of last questions come in. So we'll take those, and those will be the last few that we do. So the first of those is asking about whether the pandemic, we have the impression that the pandemic has reversed some of the small and slow gains that have been made in the aviation industry. And what's the formula for remedying that, given that the airlines will probably struggle financially for the next period?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. We, in the last quarterly forum where we brought all the airlines together, that was one of the things that they were wrestling with is, as we said, women have been adversely impacted, and women are opting out of the workforce at a rate that is more pronounced than men since the pandemic. And of course, that gives us a double whammy. It's that, how do you make the industry attractive, and how do you make it attractive to women? And they may not be, they provide slightly different challenges. I think the financial aspect is always a really tricky one, because in order to attract talent that doesn't naturally want to come to your industry, you have to invest. But I would also say I'm an optimist by nature, so I would always also say I think that this is where the advent of social media and networks has actually been a gift, because it allows us to have a bigger reach than we may have done before, and it allows us to change perceptions. Going back to the awards are, you can't be what you can't see. So we need to see more. We need to see more action from CEOs as well in actually committing and saying, okay, well, we are going to make sure that as we rebuild and restart, we are very mindful of these gender dynamics, particularly the gender dynamic at the moment, and that can be very simple things like saying, you know what, I'm not going to fill the job just if the right candidate isn't a woman. I'm going to make sure that I fill my talent pipeline. So, simple things like having a slate of female candidates as well as male candidates, and insisting on that. So not, if you're going to a headhunter, not just settling because they give you a list of men, but saying, absolutely not, go back again and find me some women for this candidate pile, particularly in our senior jobs, because we know that we've also lost some great senior talent from the industry who are saying that they don't want to come back. So we've got to find ways of broadening our network.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Jane. I think that brings us pretty much